How do you go from being an almost high school dropout to becoming a leader in the world of food research and development? It sure wasn't through luck.
And then I love being able to form the strategies from like a product development and business standpoint.
That was Davis Jaeger, R&D leader, culinary expert, and food scientist. Davis has had a winding career path up until this point. He started out in the hospitality industry when he was just 14 working as a busboy. However, he moved over to the kitchen after one of the chefs had quit one day and another had asked him to come into the kitchen. Davis loved working in the kitchen and he stayed there for over 11 years, working his way from the bottom to the top. But over time, this life grew tiring and the long and irregular hours were taking a toll on Davis. Davis decided to make a change, and that's how he ended up at the Culinary Science program at Clemson University.
President of Food Science Club, sat in front of my classes, friends with all of my professors.
He has loved food science ever since and has not looked back. Davis is a highly skilled R&D professional, leading multiple teams from the ground up, and he has used his culinary background to help him throughout his career. So in this episode of the Food Grads podcast, you will learn about the challenges and failures Davis has faced along the way.
It was challenging, but that's partially why I did it. I didn't shy away.
The necessity of gaining
you're spot on,
plant
right? There's a lot of people that want to
excel in a career in R&D.
experts.
The skill of communicating technical details to non-technical
had not
stakeholders.
Considered that at all for certainly the first half of my career. Not until recent years when you're thrown into it.
Asking good questions to get the problems that you need solved, and so much more. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, and here at Food Grads, we're here to remind you that there's always something for everyone in food, and we'll help you find it. Okay, let's get into this conversation. Davis, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. I appreciate the invite and the time because I'm really looking forward to this.
I'm really looking forward to just exploring your career. You have done a lot in the space of product development. I know a lot of the people that listen to the show, that's kind of the field that they want to go on. And I know that you've had a lot of your journey and you've had a lot of bumps and all those, and we want to really explore that today. So thanks for coming on the show.
I'm an open book, so ask away. Let's get into it.
Perfect. That's always the best way. Well, you know what? I think that you can introduce yourself better than I could. So why don't you introduce yourself and then maybe talk about some of the steps that you went through to get to where you are today, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Yeah, that's a you give me a blank check, Veronica, but I like it. It's been a weird journey. I was a chef, professional chef for 10 years. It started off, I think I was 15, my first job, and I was a busboy first week. And someone had quit in the kitchen and the chef was like, "You, come back here." And I started cutting onions, and then I never left the kitchen for like 10 years. And I loved it. There's a romance to it. It's like they're like pirates, right? They're partying, they're drinking, there's knives, there's fire, there's profanity. I'm like, I love it. Sign me up, right? And I excel in that environment. It takes a certain kind of sociopath to survive in that fast-paced, on your feet, nights, holidays, weekends, getting out at 2 a.m, every single day, just grinding. And I liked it, but after about 10 years, it was like, okay, this is probably not going to end well. Although that is my passion. Let's be clear, food is my passion. Everyone gives me a hard time. If you look at my Instagram, I have 2 young daughters and a lovely wife, and no pictures or mentions of them on my Instagram. It's all food and knives. But if you want to see my family, you click on photos I'm tagged in, which is like my family's joke, and friends, they joke about it, but I love food. I mean, that's my passion, right? And I was on my own at 18. I was working, living on couches for like 2 years, just like embracing the lifestyle of like hospitality back of house. And I would work my way up at all the restaurants, starting at prep or garde manger, and then working my way up to saucier or executive chef or sous chef, what have you, in different cuisines. So I was like learning the school of hard knocks, right? Like that was my journey. And I applied that same philosophy to CPG as well. 10 years in-ish, more or less. And I was like, I need to find something. Like I wanted a girlfriend. I wanted like a weekend. I wanted to like see people other than the people I work with in the kitchen, right? So I was like looking, and my parents, they were like, "Hey, we heard about this thing called food science." And I was like, the what? Did not know. And let me preface this by my college graduation. I was on out of school suspension, and they walked and they called my parents and they said, "Just don't bring him back." That was how I graduated high school. So it puts into context like the kind of lifestyle. I was a troublemaker. I was probably a terrible kid for my parents. But I love food. And so I like found my passion, right? I found my passion path and I'm like, okay, I'm embracing it. And I wanted to like go from the culinary to the food science. I didn't know anything about it. And I wrote like a letter, heartfelt, fully transparent to the admissions office at Clemson. And it was, I don't know, probably about 10 days later to 2 weeks later, I was like moving into an apartment there. And they were like, sir, we'd like you to stay in dorms. And I'm like, all right, I think I was like I was above the age of drinking alcohol age. I was like, I'm not staying in dorms. I've already lived on my own for years. And they were like, okay with it. But I really like did not look back, at that point. So I was like, okay, I want that paper because that paper is my entry fee to CPG. And that was the focus, right? And so I was, president of Food Science Club, sat in front of my classes, friends with all of my professors. I even like cooked for them at their houses, dinner parties on the weekends and stuff. Like I was grinding. I also cooked while I was in college, rolled sushi and, did whatever I could to like bootstrap funds and pay for it, plus some loans. But once I got through, just to like proof it in the pudding, when they were graduating and walking, I wasn't even in South Carolina at that point. I was already working in a different state. Like I was so focused on getting the paper, getting out, into the industry and grinding, right? The same way I did that in the culinary hospitality. I was like, let's go, right? CPG is a very different environment. And it was tough. I think I did kind of a startup job right after. I had a job offer in Philly for Edam Foods, which does roasting of vegetables and soup bases for Campbell's. It's in the area. They flew me out. It was kind of a culinary job. I liked it. But I had a friend of the family give me this crazy idea back in Tampa, where I was from. And it was for, healthy food startup. He mentioned the word equity. I was like, I don't know anything about this. Sounds really cool. Lo and behold, it was like 90-hour weeks. I mean, I built the kitchen. I built the menus. I had a team of about 20 to 30 chefs working for me.
Wow.
Was probably smoking like 2 packs of cigarettes a day. So I was again back in the hospitality, in the grind, unhealthy. I'm like, what am I doing here? And my girlfriend, who I met at the time, was in the New York area working for, I think it was Unilever at the time. So I was like, this long distance thing isn't going to work. Long story short, packed my car, left everything in Tampa, and just drove up to New Jersey to try and get a job because I was applying and all the doors kept closing in my face. No one wants to pay reload for like an associate scientist, right? So I just threw myself in the car, drove up there, rented a 300 square foot room in the Heights from a friend, Letitia, that's her name. She was actually, we're still Facebook friends, Instagram friends, but remember, my girlfriend at the time lived in Hoboken. I lived in the Heights. I was trying to get my foot in the door at CPG. Ended up tossing pizzas at a little corner pizzeria. That was miserable. Got fired from that job. I had too many, we'll call it ideas. I just think they didn't want to hear it in a mom and pop place. A lot of times chefs can be arrogant as well. So there was a bit of humble pie that I needed to serve myself along the journey. But I actually found my way into a temp agency that was then supplying the CPG industry. And I was like, okay, foot's in the door. The crack's open, right? I got into Pinnacle Foods as a temp, and I think it was maybe 90 days in, they decided to hire me. And I was like, let's push the throttle forward, right? I was like, let's grind. So I loved it. That was my first CPG experience. Great manager, great mentor, good culture, good team. It was fun. They were, playing with some iconic brands that I'd always grown up with. This was like my first experience in manufacturing and pilot scale and ingredients of procurement and the corporate jargon and stage gate process and everything. And I was just like, soak it up like this, let's go. Right. And it was really fun. I worked on Duncan Hines innovation team, cakes and brownies and frostings. And so obviously eating a lot of cakes and brownies and frostings, I probably put like a freshman 30 on in my first year.
Dream job.
Yeah, I was just like, well, I'm just going to eat this cake with my hand, and making frosting and stuff. And it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about fats, learned a lot about starches, bakery process. The making of the frosting, because it's shelf stable, was probably the most interesting thing from like a tech and science standpoint. Dry blending brownie mixes and cake mixes isn't that sexy, but paid the bills. I think the fun part was validating and baking and making all the products. So it was a lot of fun. But being young, we got married while I was at Pinnacle Foods, and Pinnacle was rumored to get purchased by ConAgra. Spoiler alert, they did get purchased by ConAgra, but I was like, I don't know if I want to move to Chicago. Spoiler alert, I live in Chicago now, which is funny as well. But at the time, I was like, you know what? Let me see what else is out there. I was there for a couple years at Pinnacle, and I was, I heard about corporate reload. And I was like, that sounds cool. I was like, we don't have kids. Let's go. And I found a job in New Orleans, of all places. So from New York to New Orleans, corporate reload to be with Smoothie King, and I was their R&D manager, and that was incredibly fun. Corporate working culture was very different. So you imagine things up north are probably a bit more fast paced, and there's a bit more, I mean, people are intelligent and genuine, but there's also a big culture change down in New Orleans where things are just a little slower, right? So I had to retrain myself on like how aggressive I was being socially at the company, and it ended up being a really fun time, really great group of people. It was right at the time when the Smoothie King was rebranding, got to build a test kitchen and analytical lab and build out their consumer testing process. Like nothing existed. It was all mom and pop and franchise driven. So I came in and brought just R&D, fundamentals and processes. And it was really fun because everything I suggested, they were like, let's explore that further. So having a seat at the table was really
That's
fun.
awesome.
And living in New Orleans like doesn't suck either, right? Like that was also pretty fun. I don't know if you've been to New Orleans, but it was
No.
the food, the weekends, the nights. There is just fantastic. Everything is romantic from like a hospitality standpoint. It's just I was in my element. And I still have good friends there and I love it. We had our daughter was born there. And after a while, we wanted to be somewhere where we could rely on the school system a little more. And there were some things that just weren't, you could tell that our longevity there, time was coming for us to move. And my wife was also working for Mondelez at the time, remote
Hmm.
job. And when that job actually expired via contract, so we're like, okay, we'll find her another job in New Orleans. There are like no CPGs in New Orleans, which to us was a learning experience.
Huh.
So we decided that we would no longer live anywhere that didn't have a large surplus of CPG companies so that we could have job
Smart
security for
choice.
both of us, you know? So
That's
it's
a
either
smart
New
choice.
York
Yeah.
or Chicago, a little bit in Colorado, and a little bit in California. Obvious choice was Chicago, right? So I started looking for jobs, got a corporate reload, come to Chicago with US Foods, which was really fun. Had a friend that worked there, product development team from Clemson, actually. It's a small industry, so we're all networking and got into US Foods. That was really fun. I worked on the dairy desk for a while, so ice creams and different cheeses, think about creme fraiche, and then found my way onto the meat desk, which is fun. So that was anything from commodities to value add, marinated sous vide, prepped items to ready to eat deli meats to whole legs prosciutto. Got to develop all of that. Loved it. I love the meat industry. Did not realize I would love it as much as I did. So much so that I wished I had been more niche in my education and gone meat science because I loved it so much. It's not for everybody. There's some smells and sounds and things that you see and have to do that as a chef, I was like, yeah, I'm here for it. I was doing this, with a butcher knife, and now I'm just seeing it at the industrial scale. Like, this is awesome. Where other people in the classes, like, I took some extra courses at Champaign, Illinois, U of I, to get some meat knowledge, and the people in there were like totally turned off by it. I loved it. It was a fun job. Which eventually, if you imagine animal products, gelatin to gummies, there was a connection that brought me to Ferrara Candy Company, right? And that was a leap that I did not take because of the products. I thought I was going to be in the meat industry forever. Like I was like, this is it, right? Because I
Hmm.
did dairy, I did frostings, I did cake mixes and bakery, and I'm like, same way I did the School of Hard Knocks for the Culinary, different restaurants with Thai and French and Italian. I was doing the same in CPG, right? Just trying to understand what area and categories I wanted to excel in, because I did not get a very specific niche food science degree. It was culinary science through the RCA, so it was general, right? I knew enough, but I wasn't considered a subject matter expert. And I thought when I went to meet, this is it. But a recruiter called, and I love the recruiting industry because it's always, who's knocking on the door? There's something interesting there. And I took the job because of the leader at Ferrara. She had been at Kraft and came into Ferrara and had a great reputation. My wife knew who she was. My wife worked at Kraft for quite a while. And I was like, I'm going to take a job now based on the leadership, which was a bit of a step change. And I really liked her. I liked her vision and what she wanted to do to build the company and R&D. And I just rode that wave. I was like, this is great. Embraced it fully. Had a great time. Ended up increasing my scope of work and getting a promotion to director and leading R&D projects with the Ferrero and Ferrara teams, and then working on vitamins and co-packing, and then all international projects. I mean, it was all of this really fun stuff. Um, and I was say probably about 5 years, and then another recruiter called, and I was like, "This is interesting." They're talking about a chocolate company, and that I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know anything about chocolate, but it seemed like an um, interesting challenge, right? To put it that way, and go
Mm-hmm.
back into like the startup world. So going from middle and big size companies to something smaller, having failed with the concept in Tampa, I would consider that a failure, right? Because I was working 90 hours a week and wasn't happy. And at the end, I didn't stay. So I consider that a failure, right? And I'm like, do I really want to go back to a smaller startup? And sure enough, I mean, here we are to this day. So having a good time.
Wow.
That was
That's
long-winded
amazing.
as well, Veronica.
That is okay. I mean, you have clearly a lot of things to share that you've gone through your career. And, I appreciate that you included portions about, personal life because I feel that sometimes can be missed when we have these discussions about having, a wife or having a partner or having kids. Like those do play a role in your decision and those do get left out. But one of the things that really stood out was that you switched so many industries. And we would think that once you start, like, we start in food, you're set for the like juice or the bakery company for the rest of your career because that's where you get your specialized knowledge. But it sounds like you can really switch between the different industries. So what I was wondering is when you switched between the different like product types, was there anything that you particularly did to like ensure that you were doing good at the beginning of the role, or did you find like challenging as you switched between?
It was challenging, but that's partially why I did it. I didn't shy away. I mean, you're spot on, right? There's a lot of people that want to be seen as subject matter experts. And I honestly had not considered that at all for certainly the first half of my career. Not until recent years was that something that I'm like, I wonder if things would have been different if I would have focused on one part of the industry. But to be candid, I didn't know what I liked, and I wasn't sure
Mm.
that um, I knew for sure of like shelf stable frostings and cakes was not for me, right? Like I knew for sure there, and I wanted to find more, but dipping my toe in like the franchise realm, which is Smoothie King, which is proteins and smoothies and operating procedures, and it was very different. Things about it I liked. I went to the food service with US Foods. Things about it I liked. I found meat. I was like, I love meat. But there, and I thought for sure, I was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm doubling down. I'm going to be the subject matter expert here. The rest of my career shall be in meat, right? And you don't know what you don't know when a recruiter calls. And
Hmm.
it took that recruiter quite a bit of time to get me to have a sit down with the boss, who's now the chief innovation officer at Ferrara. Because my immediate I was like, nah, no way. I'm like, candy? I don't even eat that stuff. Like, there's what? I'm a meat guy. I like to make bacon and turkey deli meats, and I just launched a prosciutto. I was like, that's fun. That's sexy. Candy?
Hmm.
Nonsense, right? And um, I just kind of over time, after talking to her, I went with less of the focus on subject matter experts and more around career development and like opportunities to build something, which to me is a path of an opportunity path that does exist, right? And for me, what I really realized is that I enjoy the opportunity to like have a seat at the table, put my signature on something. I love launching products, but maybe I don't want to go the path of like expert or principal scientist, right? Which is a path. I enjoy the people management. I
Hmm.
love building a team. I love career development. I love seeing the team excel and succeed and crush their career goals, I love being able to give them those opportunities. And then I love being able to form the strategies from like a product development and business standpoint, right? So for me,
Hmm.
I can be category agnostic to some degree if that's really what I'm focusing on. And so I took a lot of that from the Ferrara with what I was doing and building some of the strategies and planning to now doing the same thing at Feastables, right? Just on a different scale and definitely different speed and timetable.
Hmm. I'm going to go back to the career development side, but I just want to touch upon, you said that you knew that you didn't like shelf stable frostings and that. Like, how did you know that you didn't enjoy product development and not just that specific category? Like, I
Well,
guess I'm wondering is like, how are these fields different, but yet you're
yep.
still doing product development?
Well, I like product development. Don't get me wrong, right?
Okay,
There's
yeah,
still
right.
the connection between, if I'm a chef and I make a dish and I watch someone enjoy it and eat it, that same pleasure exists when I'm at the grocery store and I see someone buying my product off the shelf. That's rad. I love it. That never gets old. I think that's why everyone does it. Um, I mean, how many product developers and food scientists you see do their product selfie? Like everybody, right? Once it's in store, everyone's doing the selfie. Like I spent a year or 4 years, or I killed myself for this, but look, it's here, right? Everybody does it. That's the fun part. Plus, your friends and family can go buy your products. I
For
love
sure.
that.
It's also fun
Uh,
when you're in food safety and you're looking at the lot code and you're like, yeah, I checked it on my shift.
yeah, exactly. I've had moments where, like my brothers, for example, I've got three younger brothers, and they all live in Tampa. So I'm the only Jaeger that lives in Chicago. And they're like, is this, this is the right item? And I'm like, flip it around. I was like, what's the lot code? I was like, I was actually there that week, right? And they're like, that's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, open it. There should be like a scratch here from a vacuum nozzle that we had to fix. And he's like, look,
Yes,
and I'm
I know
like,
what you're
I was
talking
there
about.
when that was made, so it is pretty fun. But I think for me, when it's to answer your question specifically around the frosting, there was like a moment in time, and specifically it was in Centralia, Illinois, outside of St. Louis. It was probably around 2:30 a.m. in the morning. I was at the plant, and it was like a 6,000 pound batch of like orange creamsicle frosting. And I was just like looking at this thing going, this isn't for me. I don't like frosting. I don't like this at all. Like, we're running things through the rotator. There's, some dangerous equipment, the fumes, it's hot, it smells. And I'm just like, I don't want to eat this stuff. I don't like it. I can't do this, and that immediately, like, that was really what drove me to like pick up the phone with recruiters and be like, what's out there? So that was a specific moment. I think I'll never forget that. I was like, this isn't what I signed up for. Like, this isn't the dream I was pursuing, is really what it was. And I was like, all right, let me grind it a bit differently. And that's what led me to finding different companies, different opportunities, different styles of product development and leadership ultimately.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it seems like you you just kind of knew, like you knew that you liked the product development side, like making the products, the working with others, coming up with the new ideas, trying to hone in everything, but it's just this environment particularly just does not fit for
Correct.
me.
I like manufacturing. I just don't like manufacturing shelf stable frosting.
Very specific, but it's like that's something that they say, I know, for students to definitely do co-op positions because then you can also know if you like something and if you don't like something. I mean, I didn't get to explore different industries when I did mine, but it is a good indication, and it goes to show that you're not pigeonholed as soon as you come out of school, and it's like, well, you've only done this role for this.
Yeah,
Well, you are like the food industry is vast enough that you don't need to have a specific niche, but you can have a niche if you
you
want to.
absolutely can. Like my wife is like, she's working not in dairy, but she is a super taster. She competed in dairy at the collegiate level. She worked on ice cream for many, many years for Unilever. Cheese, ice cream, milk. She's a dairy expert. Right now, no, she's R&D manager at Eagle Foods, right? So they do hamburger helper and yes, the Eagle condensed milk, but there's not a lot of innovation there. But
Mhm.
she's subject matter expert when it comes to dairy. I think if you're in college, to not have exposure at like the corporate level, meaning a co-op or an internship, that is a huge miss. I think that it is some degrees require it, some schools require it, but I think you want to be able to market yourself, and a lot of people are like, well, we're looking for people with experience. You're like, well, how do I get experience if I can't, it's this chicken and egg thing, right? It's a great learning experience. One, you get to understand the dance, the jargon, some of the corporate baloney, you get that. So you're not caught off guard when you're thrown into it. Maybe you can get a taste of the inner working politics, so you can't be caught off guard for that. But also spec systems, decision-making process, stage gate, and in general, how that works, RTM or route to market. And then most importantly, which was a huge miss for me in college, being in the manufacturing plant. That is, if you're going to get rid of all that other crap, go to a manufacturing plant, work in the manufacturing plant, get time there, understand the flow of materials coming in and the flow of products going out, and everything that goes in between, and the HACCP plans and the quality controls and the set points and processing parameters and why you do things, and the rheology and pH buffers and food, like all of it is a very balanced system. And you have to understand like risk areas where you can impact as a product developer for innovation, right? So if you can tweak these ingredients or push this equipment to its upper limits, you can get a different output. Like, you need to understand manufacturing. You don't need to be an engineer. You need to understand enough to be dangerous. And the way to do that in college is to intern at companies that have manufacturing. That's incredibly important.
This podcast episode is sponsored by CareersNow. CareersNow is Food and Beverage Ontario's multi-year workforce development initiative that is connecting students and job seekers with employers in Ontario's food and beverage processing industry to connect you with exciting career opportunities. Check out careersnow.ca for more information on exciting jobs, career information, industry mentors, and training opportunities for professional development. Let's get back into the episode.
A couple of my wife and I are peers that were our peers when we went to Clemson are now actually faculty at Clemson in the food science department. And we were both there in February talking, and they've done away with the manufacturing exposure elements. I think when we were there, we went to like a pasta plant, which I'm like, this isn't that crazy from like a learning exposure standpoint. It was still good to see manufacturing and whatnot, but they just did away with it. And I'm like, that's a huge miss. So I was like, okay, well, have
That's
all
so
of your
strange.
kids reach out to me. I will get them all internships. They need help. I want to help. So I use that as an opportunity to actually source some I guess mentees that I'm helping get internships and understand what types of options they have and what's out there from like different size companies to different size internship opportunities, and just frankly helping them network. I mean, between my wife and I, all of our former peers at Clemson, we are that peer group from Clemson, that food science peer group is pretty tight still. We go to each other's weddings and we see each other, like we'll go visit, friends at their houses with their families and stay there. We're all connected. So people are trying to get internships or jobs. We just tap into our network. That's our greatest strength as a community, right?
I think that's good because I know when I did my first co-op position at a manufacturing plant, like I feel like I grew as well, just as a person that I'm in the workforce, because when you're on the manufacturing floor, like you're not just exposed to, when you go to university, you start to get exposed to like 18 to 25-year-olds for the most part. And like, that's all and you get a certain level of thinking, which is good. I mean, you're there to learn. But then when you go into the manufacturing plant, you realize that there's people from all walks of life. You start to talk to people in a different way. You start to understand how the products were. Like you can't teach that. You can, but you don't really. Like there's just something that opens your eyes.
Exactly. It's the same when I was a chef and I didn't go to culinary school, and we get the young whippersnappers right out of culinary school and they were book smart. They didn't know anything about existing and surviving in a kitchen. And it's the same in food science, right? If you don't have that real life knowledge, you're shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, and you go into a plant and there's like street knowledge and industry knowledge, meaning the people that work that equipment, they like intimately know their machines and their lines. And like, you want to like learn as much as you can, because as a developer, the best way to learn is when like hits the fan in the manufacturing plant. When things go wrong, all the time it happens, but that's the moment of learning. And want to have these bits of knowledge. Like all of my learnings in manufacturing have been through massive failures. Just high stress, like the world's ending. This is it. I'm going to fire myself. I know I'm getting fired. Like this is it. I could not imagine a bigger mess up, right? And just how you handle those and the creative solutions for manufacturing and having the smart people around you as well. I think there's all of these things. Like if you bundle it all together, it's going to equate to like career success. But I think you need to have that base knowledge of just understanding what's going on in the plant. Like that's incredibly important. What was your co-op? You said you were at one.
I did so I did 2 co-op positions, both at the same company. Once first in food safety, and then first in quality control, and then I went into research and development for them. And then once I graduated, I worked a full year in quality assurance at a snack food company. So the first one was dairy company, so butters, whipped creams, cheese, like yes. And then I moved to a snack food company, so we did co-packing for just any type of snack foods, but primarily manufacturing of nut products.
So I'm assuming rotary drums panning, right, with heated elements at the bottom. Yep. Okay. See, that's cool though, because
Yes.
there's in that industry,
Yes.
there's an art. Those panners, I'm assuming it was done by hand, right? They weren't using like mega bacinas and drams and Dumoulins,
Yep.
so not
Yep.
automated. Those guys like Bob and Frank do it slightly different,
Yes.
right? And how do you standardize it? But they, they're putting it in. It's an artisan process that you're trying to standardize. So it's probably great learning for you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you hit it exactly. Like I could kind of start to tell because I worked I did rotational shifts of morning and afternoon. So I got to see the people from both aspects, and you could kind of start to tell who was making what and how would they make it. And, you don't want to tell
You're the
them,
police.
because you're in QC, you don't want to, yeah, a little bit. So, and then when they would bring on new individuals, it's like a lot of it was hard to articulate. Like, they would teach them, and I'd be like, they were the masters, and I was like, I know this is off, but I don't really know what you're supposed to do. And I learned better over time, but you started to like see those nuances of the different individuals. And like, I give them credit. They were like right in front of the panners. Like it was hot, there was flames, there was sugar, there was like, it was hard work.
Panning is an interesting process. I mean, if it's like raining outside, your relative humidity, unless you have controls in the facility itself with like a Munter unit or something along those lines, your RH is going to go up when it rains. That's definitely going to affect what you're doing inside your pan, right? So those people running those pans, that's where the artisan piece comes. They know. They see the product and how it tumbles and where it's collecting and which section of the pan, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, and absolutely, like working in being in the Greater Toronto area, we have winters, so the winters get really cold, and then well, maybe not as much anymore, but and the summers get really hot, and just seeing them, and even just the starting peanut materials from how how you started off that season, like that affects it, and you want to standardize it, but it's
Absolutely. I think this conversation is reminding me of like when I have my team, and you sometimes want to hire subject matter experts in certain areas, but it's good to know, you don't have to know everything. And if you're in the plant and it's cold or hot or raining and there's quality issues, right? I'm just putting an analogy to your real life scenario. If it was my team and there's problems, I don't expect you to know everything, right? Because they've been doing it for 20 years, every single day. You can't compete with that, but I expect you to know how to get the right answers, right? Like how to ask the technical questions in more than one way to make sure that you're getting the right answers. And that's what I've always instilled in my team, which goes back to, being a subject matter expert or not. I think both are okay, but I really think that you need to know how to mine for technical data and know what you're asking for to get solutions or data to help with creative solves. Or, I think that's definitely something that all product developers should have, and a lot of that starts in the plant as well, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good insight right there. And when you say like going and probing for questions, is this something that you have, like you said, hard knocks, like learning over time, or was it like a skill that you honed over time? Like how do you know what questions you're asking? Like
imagine prefacing it by just being like, hey, listen, everybody in the room, I'm going to ask a set of like really stupid questions. So please don't roll your eyes at me, right? And you just gotta take the pride piece and put it aside and be okay asking dumb questions so you get the right answers. I had um, someone on my team at Ferrara. I hired her right out of college. Didn't have a ton of experience with like internships, right? You know, it's pretty limited when you're going to college. You know, she had the degree, got it. So threw her onto a bunch of technically challenging projects, and imagine like making nerds, for example. I'm sure you're familiar with nerds, the candy, right? And that's panning, and those are perfectly perfect. So they all have slight differences, and we were doing some things for the EU, which involved natural colors and flavors, and you imagine moisture levels and pH levels and all that stuff is going to mess with your natural colors and stability and whatnot. And imagine taking someone out of school and putting them in this like sprint of a project that's like massive for like the first launch in Europe, and being like, I need you to cover this and like get it right. And it was a bit of like jumping in the deep end of the pool. And I told her this day one, I was like, I don't expect you to have all the answers. You will find failures, learn from the failures, ask the right questions. And she's like, those two tools right there that I gave her helped her excel. She's crushing it right now. I think she's the lab manager for AG1. AG1's like a startup super grains company, right? Probably see it on Instagram everywhere. They have a really good marketing campaign. But no, I mean, and she didn't know anything about super grains or dry blending, but she's taken those tools that I've used and helped her, put in her pocket, is to, have the fundamentals, the understanding, and then know how to get like ask the right questions and get the right answers.
This is like really specific to that. How do you demonstrate you can do that on an interview?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if there's a good answer. An interviewing process, to be honest, there's no like formula. It's interviews and interviewing and hiring is like messy. Let's just call it what it is, right? You can, and I'm speaking from interviewing myself or interviewing, and from my wife's point of view, right? Both being an interviewer and interviewing, and you can literally say one off word to one person and you're out for like little to no reason, right? You can get screened out early on for the most ridiculous things, or frankly, they just have too many candidates and they don't go through everyone. Like, it's not a perfect process, right? And I've seen this in many different companies, and it's really, it sucks. You gotta be at the right place at the right time. But no, you have to be at the right place at the right time. And nowadays, it really helps if you have someone that works there, or have someone that knows someone through networking. I mean, that's the way to get in, I believe. So how do you convey that in an interview process? I don't know. I think it depends on the level of the job that you're applying for and the type of examples that you have preloaded for those questions that you're going to get in every interview. Is give me an example of when blah, 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 blah. Insert corporate scenario, right? And that happens. Just have your answers ready. For me, I like to be completely myself, because I don't want to get the job and then see my true self and they'll be like, oh, I don't like this guy, he's a little too wild or whatnot. I'm like, take it or leave it. This is how it is. Like how we're talking right now is how I would interview. I'm just genuine, right? Genuine to a fault. But I also talk in terms of like my failures. I feel like that's always been beneficial, is like, when things are great, everyone's happy. When things don't go great, that's what everyone's trying to tease out, is like, how did you handle it? What happened? Why did it happen? Everything around the failure. So I just jump into it. I'm like, listen, I'm not perfect, and I've had a lot of failures, and here's what I've learned from them, and here's what happened. I think it's part of the process. So that's a way to maybe tease out that I can ask the right questions, and I'm a creative problem solver. It's just to embrace, like, listen, let's talk about my failures, which is unusual in an interview process, but it works. Because if you tell me, Veronica, you haven't failed, I'm out of here, you're lying, right? Any person I interview with, they tell me they haven't failed, goodbye. That's nonsense. Everyone fails. Hell, it's the weekend. I failed today just at my house, right? Like I got the wrong groceries, right? Not that it makes sense for an interview, but I'm saying like failure is just part of the human process. So it's a really good topic to discuss during the interview process. And it really will give like the hiring manager good insights into How do they come up with creative solutions? How do they work under pressure? How do they find their path in the ambiguity? I mean, there's a lot of things that can come out of it.
Do you want to talk about one of your challenges or failures then, now that we're kind of on the subject of we're being open book?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I can't talk about failures with the current job, which I'm
Of
like,
course.
oh boy, because you say it and I'm immediately like PTSD of like last week, right? I'm like, oh no.
Recency
No.
bias. Yeah, recency
Yes,
bias.
yes. But I would say, like with Ferrara, for example, there was a project that's going to be launching, I think, in May. So I can't mention it by name, but it was an incredibly long process for a panned item. It was also so this is a candy item. It had a mogul, so a starch kind of gummy center, and then it was panned. So it had a shell. So imagine like a soft gummy center and a crunchy sugar shell, right?
Mhm.
Very long process. Multiple different colors, multiple different flavors, natural colors. So hooray with pH issues. Stability challenges. We're trying to match different types of technologies. So gummies are made on something called a mogul, and how you deposit and how you cook and pull a vacuum will depend on the finished product's texture, water activity, available starch. There's a whole matrix there, right?
Mhm.
And having the right center is important for making sure you have the right product to pan and ultimately get to market. And
makes
it
sense.
takes about 7 days to make a little center. And then it takes 14 hours to sugar shell one of them, right? So you imagine you were doing your nuts and panning. I'm sure a cycle in the pan, what, like an hour, maybe, right?
Yeah,
Maybe,
a little longer. Yeah.
yeah, in 14 hours. And this is automated, right? So imagine controlled environment, humidity, temperatures, real pain in the ass, right? And we're like under crunch time. Like it's like we have to get this done so that we can get the graphics ready and start shelf life. And shelf life was the concern.
Ooh, shelf life is not fun.
No, it's not. And you know, in a perfect world as a developer, you want to do your trials and then evaluate your product for stability and multiple different holding conditions so that you can like crisis check it. Are we going to have a problem in 6 months, guys? Like I want to know now versus you launch and then you're like, oh, everything in market's degrading and sweating. So we ran a lot of these trials, and the target kept moving a little bit on some of the formula issues due to some consumer testing, talking about texture and sizing and stuff. And we weren't really capturing any stability data because there frankly wasn't any time. And this is like high profile project, like probably one of the biggest projects at the company. So for our, right. And we, had a good trial. I think it went on for like 3 weeks. It was rough living down in Mexico in the summer for like 3 weeks, but we did it. We survived. They have good tequila. But we went back for another trial, and all of the retains that we had in the R&D lab there were just decaying, like cavities, it looked like. So it was basically what happened is that water at the deposit on the mogul was not fully attached to all the starch, so we weren't cooking it properly. There were issues with the vacuums. This is root cause analysis, right? And we ran through that issue, which then created issues in the sugar shell. So that free water was coming out and it was interacting with some of the acids that were around the piece itself, so that the candy shell was starting to crack and then holes were creating. So you imagine it was like the pieces had leprosy. Like they were rotting from the inside. They weren't rotting, but like
Yeah.
they were
looked like.
liquefying and decaying. I mean, not in the sense of like rotting, but like it looked like they were just disintegrating from the inside out. And the speed in which we were running, there was like no time for necessarily reformulating. We were very constrained by what acids we could use based on sour levels and labeling restrictions. So the ability to change formula was like, no one had an appetite for that. Everyone was like super pissed. It was very high profile. And when things go wrong, everyone's pointing at you, like you did something wrong. So I'm working with my team on just, clearing the noise so that they can focus on the technical, and I will insulate them from the corporate baloney, right? And really just started through a design experiment, which is something that you should learn to do as a developer, right? To understand how do you isolate variables to then understand root cause analysis or root cause, and then how do you address the root cause, right? So you want to do a bunch of testing, right? You want to not change more than one variable at once, because if you do, and something still goes wrong, how do you know what was driving that, right? So it's really an approach that's structured, that does test. But let me remind you that to cook and deposit and get product takes about a week, and then the pan is 14 hours. So variable testing is very long, and we had no time. And it turned out that we were able to make some improvements on the line, process improvements, because the plant, if your audience is listening here, when something goes wrong, the plant's always like formula, and R&D is always like process, right? And everyone's doing this. And no one wants to change their formula, and no one wants to change their process, right? So, you know, trying to balance those politics as well. It turned out that there were some, we'll say, precision issues with some of the equipment that were driving some inconsistencies in depositing that then drove to stability issues with the finished product, right? And it took us a while. I mean, I think it was probably like 85% accuracy on the root cause analysis, but what we were doing was working. So it's like, okay. And I think now, because I still keep in touch with the teams, and I think they're launching in May this year. So it's actually going to be, it's going to find its way to market pretty soon. So can't tell you what it is now, because I know that the Ferrero team is very secretive, but I can say that it was probably about 4 years of my life on that project to finally get it to see in market. I'm like, I'm good. So it's a lot of time spent, a lot of time in Mexico, a lot of time spent on that project, looking at drums and pans and moguls. So.
Absolutely. Wow. So it sounds as though when it comes to, you're going to have failures, it's going to happen, and we don't even have to always call them failures, but like there's going to be hiccups there. But the key is to, isolate and try to figure it out like one little bit at a time, and asking the right questions in order to like really gauge it from like what perspective is it, and like starting from the ground up.
Yep. Agreed. I think there's going to be a tendency for people when something goes wrong, people go, and they kind of knee-jerk reaction. But being on the R&D side, you have to go back to your fundamentals and understand the process, that it takes time to test and collect data, review the data, make decisions on formula and process. Like, it's not something that you just like run into where, for example, marketing, maybe like, problems with the consumer feedback on the prototypes of the samples, or engineering to be like, we can't run at throughputs, like we're losing money on the line making it. It's like, okay, R&D's tasked with fixing that stuff, right? It's like, okay, instead of just like freaking out and having a knee-jerk reaction, you have to be like, okay, here's my approach, here's what I'm going to do in this amount of time, here's when I'll have enough information to give a decision, right? So it's how you stakeholder management and how you communicate to them, because what you could fall into as a trap in R&D is that you also panic and run and sprint and skip things, and then you find yourself after 3 weeks of doing that, you're no closer to a solution than you were on the start, right? So you have to go back, remember your fundamentals, take your approach, communicate what you're going to have and when, right? You don't have to have all the answers, but I'm going to have enough information to give an update by this date, right? And that's how you can manage it, because I've seen it many, many times. The people, they run around, their hair's on fire. World's ending, hair's on fire. We have to be somewhat of a calm voice, right? And I think that's kind of the key here.
Yeah. I understand a little bit what you're saying. I haven't done like the full product development as a finish role, but as someone doing a PhD, a lot of what you're talking about sounds very similar to what I'm doing. And I'm going, why the heck are my results not reproducible? What am I doing? And then there's been that has been one of my own failures, is like acknowledging that take a step back, you're freaking out, you're causing your own problems a little bit. And like, how do you actually go back to the variables? What is it that you're changing? Because like I deal with fat research, so the temperature of the room actually does play a role in it. It's very frustrating, but it's like, how do you isolate what's a you, like just as a personality wise, and what's an actual quantifiable result that like you could start to address? So
yeah, absolutely.
I do know that.
It feels like you get it, Veronica. I mean, what you're saying, I'm like, the room, the temp, yeah, I've had that problem happen more than once.
As you've said it very much, I mean, I could talk about my own failure, but that I spent way too much time on my previous chapter in my thesis because I was trying to keep doing the same thing over and over again because I thought it was how I was doing it. And then eventually I just had to pause the project because I was like, I'm not figuring this out. I need to move on. I will address these, like I've done the whole temperature of the room, how I'm putting it in the room. Like, yes, I have a little bit of a lot of experience with that side.
Oh yeah. No, that's funny. I mean, even last night we had friends over, friends of ours in industry. She's the head of sales for Univar, which is imagine like an ingredient company, big one. And it wasn't even we weren't even talking about failures, but we were, obviously shop. Everyone talks shop to some degree, right? We're having a slight dinner party, and she was saying about a pet food company they were selling an ingredient to, and there were issues at scale, right? And it really came down to I'm really cliff noting this story here, but high pressure, everyone's pointing fingers, people running on their heads coming off, and really the paddle mixer that they use at the bench level and the one that they use at the industrial level, this one had 3 paddle attachments and this one had 2. And at the end of the day,
I know exactly I've experienced that exact thing with the last project where like I couldn't, when you scale it up, oh my God, yes. Those little nuances really make a difference, especially when you're dealing with fats as well. Like they crystallize so differently.
I could talk offline about fat crystallization, recrystallization with my current job. You're talking about emergency and issues. That's my current life right now. So I speak that I have gotten a crash course PhD in fats over the last month that I did not realize. I'm like, what is going on? Why is this so complicated?
That's my daily life.
And then different fats too, hard fats, soft fats, melt points. It's like the right ratios, different outcomes. We want recrystallization over X and Y amount of time. It's a fine balance,
Yes. Yes. Fats are not always where it's at.
Yep, exactly. But you know what? When you run into issues, just being a creative problem solver, imagine I don't have to be the expert in fats, but there are experts out there that run labs that have PhDs in fats. That's where we partner. Right? That's being smart and being able to bring in the right people. That's helped me drive success in my current issues,
I love that. And, I'm looking at the time and we're already at the end of our full hour, which flew by. So, I didn't even get to all the questions, but irregardless, I'm still happy with all of them. And I think that there was a lot of insights that we could pull out, but we'll do a quick 2-question thing because there was just 2 questions I really want to do. So we'll put you on the spot and we're going to ask for our new graduates, what skills or qualities do you think are crucial for their success? What should they be working on right now to get a good foot out of the door when they graduate?
Yeah, I think your communication style, it's going to be 2 things, right? In my opinion, communication style. So you're going to be the technical expert in this area. How do you communicate technical to non-technical people in a way that you can influence them and not scare them away or make them just glaze over, right? So your communication style, how you communicate technical to non-technical is going to be important. You're going to have to train and refine that approach over your career. Number 2 is street knowledge. You need it. Get in a plant, get in all the plants, get in as many plants as you can. I think that's going to be most critical because it connects, one thing to know books and bench, but to know the real life, that's super important.
Okay. Well, I realized that my second question was that question as well. So there we go. There you go. So I guess I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Davis, for coming on the show. I really learned a lot and I really appreciate your open nature. I think that we need to be reminded that failures happen in R&D. Even if you're well into your career, it's about being able to actually address these issues and that it happens to everyone and that doesn't make you.
Yeah, I agree. And I have 2 things in parting, right? Let's just call it what it is. People can work for 10 years in R&D and never launch a product because it all fails. Doesn't meet the margins, can't manufacture it. People don't know, but they think they come into it and you're just going to launch products. Sometimes you do, but sometimes you can work on something for 10 years and it never hits market, right? So it's not just this rainbow and sunshine all the time. And then the other thing too is I don't know. I'm happy to further help anybody who's got questions in the industry. I never really had that, so I am on board with anyone that would just want to shoot me a note on LinkedIn or reach out, questions about internships, general networking. I can tell them what not to do because I've already done it, right? So happy to help. be a resource if I can. Love to.
I love that. I love that. And that was my last question. Where can people find you?
LinkedIn, Instagram. If you want to see my dinners on Instagram, but LinkedIn, obviously. So
Okay. Well, I'll make sure to share that in the show notes if people want to check out your dinner. That'll be very important for many people listening.
there you go.
Maybe more important than the LinkedIn. No, I could. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know from personal experience, this was a good reminder for myself with my own PhD journey, because it's always good to have a good reminder. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I love this conversation. So thank you again, Davis.
Yeah, it was awesome. Definitely keep in touch, Veronica.
Davis was a pleasure to speak to, and I appreciated his candidness. When you are on the outside looking in, Davis seems like someone who has never had a setback in his life, and that's just not the case. This episode served as a good reminder that we all make mistakes. It's just about how you respond to them that makes you a good working professional. So thank you, Davis, for being on the show. Thank you, listeners, for tuning into the end here. Thank you to my wonderful team over at Food Grads, as well as CareersNow for helping to support this episode of the podcast. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening, and I will see you next time. How do you go from